Do you think that the religion of politics is more devout than the religion of science?
You know, it's really interesting you asked that, because I've had a couple of really interesting conversations with some friends and family about this. And if you look at like even just recent history of the U.S., the way just the fact that we, are basically, bastardized from the British monarchy, if you will, because if you look at the British monarchy, it's, divine providence, it's the king or the queen. They are anointed by God basically to rule, England, right? And so there's a lot of religion kind of baked into that government. And so the way to look at that, the way people, the average, British citizen probably look, I'm making some assumptions here when I say this. I'm also kind of like going off of some things I've heard other people say, but basically there's this idea that like, oh, well, it's basically given to us by God. And so they have this religious perspective on government. And what's really odd to me is I feel like there's this religious element to our own government. And I feel like it just kind of comes from, I think this is like where you and I kind of like have something probably in common, where we don't look to government as necessarily something as like, the end all be all. You have, Orthodox Judaism. I have Catholicism.
It's a necessary evil, basically.
Right. Yeah. So we you and I can fall back on those like independently, right? And so with these other people who don't necessarily have that in their lives, or not nearly as devout, they look at that and they're kind of evangelized by all that stuff. And it kind of goes back to like, you could look back at like Woodrow Wilson, right? The whole social gospel, basically how, we're going to democratize the entire world and that whole approach. I think that there's, and for the record, I'm not a Woodrow Wilson fan by any means. I really don't like him. I think he's quite possibly the worst president in the history of the U.S. for a myriad of reasons.
Okay.
But basically, that's another conversation like that we can have. But basically, the things that he did to justify what he did is kind of rooted in that same idea. And basically, what he's done is he's effectively it was probably him who started evangelizing our government and saying like, it's like divine right for us in a lot of ways.
Well, I don't know. We had Manifest Destiny, which has sort of religious overtones to it.
Yes, that's true too. I forgot about that too, but I'm just kind of like speaking out loud based upon what I know about
From 20th century. I would agree with you that he was the president who pretty much invoked that, certainly more than McKinley. I'll tell you this. You were actually inspired a question that I had in my brain.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about, you were talking about, you just inspired a question where you basically made a very accurate point about how religion is baked into the British monarchy. My question for you though is, do you think that it's genuine or that it's basically part of a marketing tool? Meaning if I actually claim, because the masses are back at a time when the masses are religious,
mm-hmm.
So I'm going to use religion as a tool to solidify my claim on the throne.
Mm-hmm.
And the same way, so now that we have the religion of science, we have
mm-hmm.
Biden coming forward using
mm-hmm.
the religion of science as a way of trying to rise up to the throne, that I'm going to rely on the science. So, and it's something I never thought of that comparison until you and I just right now. And it's a really interesting thing that I don't think it's a matter of the fact that the royals were particularly religious. I think that they basically decided to jump between Catholicism or Protestantism, depending on who was sitting on the throne and whether or not he liked his wife. Yeah. And I think that the religion, they probably look themselves as being godlike and not having to answer to God. But if they can use God as a marketing tool, it solidified their hold on the throne. Well, then why not use it? And if you say God chose me, and everyone agrees, yeah, God chose you, well, how the hell will anyone ever step on that? So in that sense, I don't know that it's genuine religion or they're just using religion as a marketing tool, much the same way as Woodrow Wilson probably was using religion as a marketing tool, because he knew that 100 years ago that most Americans were fairly religious Christians.
Yeah.
So but now, come forward a century later, it's a really interesting. I think there's a really interesting thought. I haven't heard anyone ever express this before, and you inspired it, and this dialogue inspired it. I think this is great. that science being the new religion,
Mhm.
now that becomes what the Democratic Party basically is advocating. I am the science. Fauci, I am the science. We believe in, we're going to follow science. It's just following science, folks. You know, it's basically everything is, and we just rename whatever we call, whatever it is we want, we call that science. You know, we'll just change that tomorrow. Everything
Yeah.
is science, 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 whether it's proven or not. And
Right.
don't question the science. All of a sudden, science has a whole different meaning, very religious meaning of you can't question me, it's divine.
Right.
And it's a very interesting thing that there's a sort of similar religious overtone to it, where it's like, and now you should follow me because I follow science, which really means I follow the faith of science.
Right. Right. No, and I think what's really interesting is you bring up the word marketing, because the way I have a lot of mixed feelings about marketing, and mostly negative, I should say, to be perfectly honest, and largely because of it's like if you look at the history of marketing in the past 100 years, really the biggest influencer marketing is Edward Bernays, and go figure, big surprise here.
I don't know enough about
okay.
Edward Bernays.
You should this should probably inspire you to do some homework, because Edward Bernays was hired by Woodrow Wilson to do the propaganda campaign for World War One, and he's got a lot. And what's really weird is you can say like, there's a lot of really obvious things about Edward Bernays that people do not deny. It's like regardless of where you sit on the aisle, you know, which are you on the left side of the aisle or the right side of the aisle, the stuff that you'll find that's related to Edward Bernays is really shocking, because he's responsible for the Banana Republic situation with the CIA working to overthrow the Guatemalan government. He's responsible for getting women hooked onto cigarettes. And I think it was the 50s. I can't remember when it was specifically, but this is a guy, because he referred to them as women, you know, lighting cigarettes. Oh, those are the suffragettes. Those are the torches of freedom that they're lighting up, basically. And so you have all these women who are getting hooked on cigarettes, you know, and engaged in a very unhealthy behavior because of people like him. But like one of the things that one of my favorite sound bites about Edward Bernays actually comes from Noam Chomsky, and what Noam Chomsky says about him is that Edward Bernays successfully took a passive population prior to World War One and made them bloodthirsty to go overseas to fight a war. But it's of no surprise, because with propaganda, the word propaganda itself, it actually before even, you know, Bernays, it's kind of funny, you know, we're talking about religion here, because the Catholic Church engaged in a lot of propaganda, but wasn't the same. And the reason why it wasn't the same, I mean, there's a myriad of reasons why, but a lot of it had to do with the fact that, I would say the point when the Catholic Church was the most prominent was probably like 1200s, 1300s, whenever, before things slowly started to come down, before, like, you know, obviously guys like Martin Luther, you know, the Reformation, all this and that started happening, the Great Schism. Slowly but surely, it was kind of like eroding in terms of being the major influential force in all of Europe. But anyways, unlike today, where it's marketing and public relations are really, it's kind of like they elevate only the good facts, you know, like, you know, to put a lawyer perspective.
Yes, it's very much a lawyer perspective.
They completely deny the bad facts altogether. And what I think what's really shocking is the fact that you don't, I think what really drives me bananas about a lot of this stuff is that you don't hear about mea culpa moments. The closest you get, for example, is I know I'm kind of going on here a little bit, but like,
no, that's fine. That's fine. I was actually researching Edward Bernays while you were talking.
Yeah. So Nick Salmon, for example, like that whole issue with all the corporate outlets, you know, in concert, you know, calling him a white supremacist, saying he went up to that Native American and basically trying to instigate a moment with him. That resulted in his own personal safety for him and his family. And the closest we got was, they, you know, is like a small article, and, you know, pick your outlet. But basically the whole idea is that, you know, they barely referred to it. It's not like in 1982, here's a good example. 1982, Tylenol had the issue with
poisoning,
poison on consumer base. And then, so what did they
I actually remember that.
Yeah. And so, but what, I mean, I wasn't even alive then, but just from research. But and you could probably speak this better than I could. But like they had like a massive marketing campaign, you know, after that, trying to say, hey, this is what happened. This is what we learned. This is what we're doing differently. And they dumped a whole lot of money and effort to basically, you know, they're basically holding themselves accountable for what had happened. We haven't had a moment like that with the corporate outlets at all in my lifetime that I can think of.